We push through the gatehouse in 1070. Before our eyes adjust to the dark, our nose already knows. Wood smoke, horse dung, wet wool soaked in weeks of sweat. Iron, and underneath it all, flesh rotting just out of sight. No tapestries yet. No throne room. Just 30 seconds of breathing. And in those 30 seconds, we already know who sleeps near the fire, who sleeps with the animals, and who doesn't sleep at all. The smell isn't accidental. It's the architecture of power. And it hits us before we see a single face. So why 1070 specifically? Why not 1050 or 1100, when the stone keeps and great halls had begun to rise? 4 years after Hastings, William's grip on England wasn't a settled thing. It was a fist, still clenching. The castles going up across the landscape were not monuments. The castles were weapons, timber, and rammed earth, thrown together by an occupying army that did not yet know if it would still be here in the spring. No time for drainage, no time for planning, no time for anything except walls and a garrison, and a way to make the people outside afraid. So the smells we are walking through are not the smells of civilization finding its shape. They are the smells of raw conquest, still wet. This narrow window of 4 years made it more extreme, more concentrated, more brutal than almost any point before or after. We are going to walk through this castle the way its occupants did. Room by room, hour by hour, from the outer gate to the Great Hall, down into the storage levels, and further down still. Environmental archaeology, medieval household accounts, Norman chronicles, the forensic study of middens, refuse heaps, and cesspits give us a surprisingly precise picture of what each space actually contained. And what something contains tells you, with almost chemical accuracy, what it smells like. Smell, used this way, becomes a historical instrument as rigorous as a trowel. One room will shock you. Another will surprise you in a way that changes everything you thought you knew. We begin at the threshold, the gatehouse, where the smell splits in two. One side carries violence held in reserve, horse sweat and ammonia rising from the stables, the acid burn of charcoal from the smithy, wet dog from the kennels, leather oiled and re-oiled until it stank of rancid fat. And underneath it all, the open sewage channels that ran across the packed earth of the outer ward, carrying waste from the garrison latrines toward the outer ditch. On the other side, bread. Fresh bread, baking in the bakehouse, yeast and warmth. The one smell carefully staged to project domestic order. To say, we are not just soldiers. We are a household. That combination means something. The Normans understood what we've forgotten. A castle entrance is not neutral space. It's a social airlock. And the smell is designed to make you choose. Are you guest or threat? Do you belong to the world of the hearth or the world of the gate? The outer ward makes you answer before you've spoken a word. That bread smell isn't hospitality. It's a test you're already taking. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Here's the uncomfortable truth about 1070. The Normans had not yet figured out how to live in what they built. We tend to imagine conquest as a clean transition. One ruler leaves, another arrives. Life reorganizes itself. But that's not what happened in England after Hastings. What happened was military occupation. And the castle of 1070 was not a home with soldiers in it. It was a military installation that people were trying to sleep in. The motte and bailey was timber and packed earth. No stone floors to scrape clean. No drainage channels cut into foundation rock. Rain soaked the ground and stayed there. Organic material, manure, food scraps, blood from slaughter. pressed into the same earth where men rolled out their bedding. The walls breathed moisture back into the space. Nothing dried, nothing dispersed. Unlike a Saxon longhouse, which a settled family managed over generations, or a later stone keep where Norman lords finally built permanent kitchens and garderobe shafts, latrine chutes, the 1070 castle existed in permanent impermanence. The garrison was always half ready to move. No one invested in systems for waste, because no one was sure the fortress would still be theirs next season. That instability had a smell. Damp wood, standing urine, animal heat and human sweat layered into timber that never fully dried out between uses. The Normans noticed, and what they tried to do about it tells us a tactical truth about how power actually works. The Great Hall was where smell became strategy. Walk in at midday and you'll see how. The floor is covered in fresh rushes, meadow, sweet, chamomile, lavender, scattered that morning by servants who knew the Lord would be holding court. The herbs are doing their job for about 10 minutes. Beneath them, months of accumulation. Food scraps ground into the dirt, dog feces, spilled ale fermenting in the gaps between stones, vomit from last night's feast that someone kicked under the trestle table. The rushes don't eliminate these smells. They create a layered effect, floral on top, rot underneath, both hitting your nose at once. Above us, the open hearth. Wood smoke and peat smoke filling the room because there's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that's never quite big enough. The smoke doesn't leave. It hangs. It coats the food being served, the hair of everyone present, the inside of your mouth. Everything tastes gray. And in the center of this, dogs. Huge hunting dogs lying near the fire, their wet fur steaming. They smell like the marshes they ran through that morning, like blood from the hunt, like the scraps they're eating off the floor. This is the room where the Norman lord performs his authority, every day, in front of vassals and petitioners and rivals. In this chaos, how does a Norman lord signal power? The answer is not what you expect. The kitchen was the best-smelling room in the castle. That sounds absurd, but it's true. And the reason why tells you everything about how these people understood the difference between food and poison. Walk into the Norman kitchen in 1070. The first thing that hits you is salt. Dense, mineral, almost sweet. Barrels of pork packed so tight the brine has turned cloudy. Whole eels hanging above a slow fire, their fat dripping into the coals and releasing that specific sweetness. Smoke mixed with rendered oil. Rounds of hard cheese aging on wooden shelves, their rinds building a white crust that smells sharp and almost sour, the way old stone smells after rain. All of this is rot, controlled rot, managed decay. The cook's entire job was understanding the difference between the rot that keeps you alive and the rot that kills you. And the only instrument for making that call was the nose. Salted pork that smells briny is safe. Salted pork that smells sweet, that sweetness underneath the salt, is already turning. Smoked eel with a clean, woody char is fine. Eel that smells like the inside of a wet boot is gone. Hard cheese that smells sour is correct. Cheese that smells like ammonia is past the line. Next to the kitchen, separated by one doorway, the larder. Carcasses hanging without any form of cold. Beef, venison, wild boar. The smell there is blood and cooling fat, and the beginning of fermentation in the muscle tissue. That smell was not a warning. It was the schedule. Who controlled that nose? Who decided? Go up one floor, past the Great Hall, past the smoke and the noise, and the 100 bodies pressed together on benches. Up the stairs, narrow, deliberately narrow, to the door at the top. Open it. The smell changes completely. Not gradually, not subtly. The moment you cross that threshold, you are in a different sensory world. Beeswax burning instead of tallow. No animal fat. No thick black smoke. No eye sting. Clean, faintly honey-sweet light. The floor is strewn with rosemary and dried roses, and every step releases something green, something medicinal, something the hall below has never once smelled like. The Lord's chests are cedar-lined. His clothing does not smell of damp wool and other men. His wine is spiced, imported, carried across the channel from Normandy. His gloves are perfumed. There is a latrine shaft cut directly into the wall, dropping into the moat below. Private, separate, gone. He does not share a drain with his garrison. Every single one of these details was expensive. Each required a supply chain, a decision, a daily maintenance of effort. None of it happened by accident. This chamber smelled controlled, and control in 1070 was the whole point. Because when everyone below you lives inside a smell, they cannot escape, and you alone can choose yours. That is not comfort. That is a statement. That is the nose understanding something the eyes can confirm, but don't need to. We have walked through the working floors of this castle. We have stood in the hall where bread was broken and oaths were renewed. We have climbed the stairs to the chamber where power slept behind bolted wood. And everywhere we went, we followed the same invisible map. The smell gradient was also a power gradient. The higher you climbed in this building, the higher you were in the social order. And the higher you climbed, the more control you had over what entered your lungs. The Lord chose rosemary and clean linen. The knight chose distance from the stable. The servant chose nothing. That was the architecture working exactly as intended. A Norman castle was not just a military structure. It was a sensory hierarchy made stone. Every floor reinforced the same message. Every threshold reminded you where you stood. The nose knew before the eyes did. Yet we have only traced the smells of labor and authority so far. We have not yet descended to the smells this fortress was built to generate. The dungeon is still below us. There was one room in this castle that smelled like somewhere else entirely. Not the hall, not the Lord's chamber, the chapel. Step through that low stone doorway and the air changed. Frankincense, myrrh, warm beeswax from candles that cost more than a laborer earned in a month. The smell hit you before the altar did, before your eyes adjusted to the dim light, before you understood where you were. That was the point. Those resins did not grow in Normandy. They came from trade routes, stretching back to Rome, carried through church networks the Normans had spent 2 generations cultivating. To burn frankincense in 1070 was to announce a connection to the continent, to Christian authority, to a legitimacy that had nothing to do with swords. It covered the conquest. That is the plain truth of it. Outside that door, blood, dung, smoke, fear. Inside, the smell of God. Or rather, the smell the church had agreed would represent God. The priest's vestments never touched stable straw. The altar cloth was changed with a frequency nothing else in this castle received. That maintenance was not devotion, it was statecraft. A lord who let the chapel smell like the rest of his fortress was a lord whose divine sanction was slipping. The incense was the argument. The altar was the throne's second seat. Below us. That phrase wasn't metaphor. The pit prison sat beneath the keep, sometimes literally carved into bedrock. No window, no drain. No light. Archaeologists have excavated these spaces, and the evidence does not spare us. Human waste in layers. Decomposed organic matter pressed into the floor like sediment. Rat remains. The chemical signature of a sealed, oxygen-starved environment, meaning the bacteria that thrive only without air had been running the room for years. That smell had a specific message. Every prisoner understood it the moment they were lowered in. It told you that no one was coming to clean this, which meant no one was coming for you. The smell of a Norman dungeon in 1070 was not incidental to the punishment. It was the punishment. It communicated, with a precision no spoken threat could match, exactly how the castle regarded the body now occupying this space. Not as a person, as an object left to process itself. The guards understood it differently. To them, the smell confirmed the hierarchy was working. Something was contained. Something was rotting in the correct direction. What the historical record avoids naming, the soil remembered. The chemistry of abandonment preserved itself. We recovered it in cores and stratified deposits, the molecular residue of a living person being treated as already gone. One more layer of this fortress remains we have not yet entered. We've walked through every room. We've opened every door. Now close your eyes and stand in the Great Hall at midnight. The smell tells you everything the stone cannot. Smoke rushes underfoot, damp and sour where bodies sat. The ghost of roasted fat still coating your throat from supper hours ago. Dogs breathing beside the hearth. The garrison, unwashed, pressed together for warmth. Above you, faint and directional, beeswax drifting down from the solar where the Lord sleeps in relative sweetness. And below, through the stone, ammonia, rot. The undercroft, the dungeons, the cisterns, the midden. Everything the castle produced and could not expel, rising through the floor like vapor through a porous lung. This is not ambiance, this is architecture. The Norman castle was a vertical column of odor, and every layer was load-bearing. The smell of the hall announced who had power. The smell of the solar announced who was protected from consequence. The smell of the dungeon announced who had been removed from mercy. We treat castles as monuments to stone. But stone does not govern. Smell governed. It mapped the social order in 3 dimensions. It enforced boundaries more effectively than walls. It reminded everybody inside exactly where it stood. The fortress did not smell despite its function. It smelled because of it. Now step back. What have we actually done here? We reconstructed a world that no chronicle ever recorded. Not because the chroniclers lacked access. They lived inside that smell. They breathed it every morning. They negotiated treaties in it, administered justice through it, slept surrounded by it. And they wrote nothing down. Not one line about what a Norman Great Hall smelled like in winter. Not one entry describing the stench that rose from the cellars in August. The scribes were recording power. They assumed everyone already knew what power smelled like. That silence is the evidence. When the written record goes quiet, it is not because nothing was happening. It is because something was so constant, so total, so woven into the fabric of daily life that it required no description. And that changes everything. Sensory history does not add texture to what we already knew. It corrects the record. It reveals the layer of lived experience that administration and chronicle systematically ignored. The body knew truths the quill never wrote. And when we recover those things, we are not decorating history. We are finally reading it whole. The next time you see a photograph of a ruined Norman castle, all clean stone and open sky, remember that what you are looking at has been stripped of everything that made it real. The noise, the bodies, the animals, the fire, and above all, the smell. Strip the senses from history, and you're left with just architecture.